focused on me. There we go. Hello, everybody. It is Michael Pierce here again. I think it's been, well, I was about to reach for my phone, but I'm filming on my phone. Um, Excuse me, I'm giving you some updates really quick before I jump into my ramble. Work on the book is going well. That's all I have to say about that. Hopefully by the end of the week, I will finally be finishing a video that I have taken way too long to make. It's just, it's not a typology video. It's talking about the ancient nature of fairy tales and discussing a bit about a particular study on fairy tales. So you'll see what I'm talking about with that. And I ramble a bit about a particular fairy tale that I think is very meaningful, and so you'll get to enjoy that. But it's been in the works for like half the year. I just keep on putting it off or have tried to do other things in its stead. And anyway, so I'll be doing that. And I was going to do, or so far, maybe I'll try to do it anyway. Thank you, by the way, for all of your suggestions for new kinds of software for putting video stuff together. I have yet to download anything because I've procrastinated. My work has started up again, so which is good, but it means I'm a bit more busy, but not terribly or anything. But yes, thank you for all of those suggestions. I really do appreciate it. I think one of those I'm sure will work just fine for the kind of things that I want to do. Speaking of which, I was trying to do another kind of cinematic thing, but this one was going to have actual like dialogue going on, and I was trying to do it where it was just me, but like in different clothing, so kind of silly, but to playing the role of different types. And I thought it was going to be really great, but when I got the footage and kind of looked at it, at least the takes that I did, I was like, this isn't really quite. Um, I'm still figuring out how to do that kind of thing because I think you'll like it if I can get it to work the way that I like it to, so it can be top quality. So I'm gonna try to take some more hope, but I've kind of put that on the shelf for now. Maybe it's not as bad as I think. I just need to take a look at the footage again. But so that's where I'm at with those things. In the meantime, I'm going to rant at the camera for you because I rather enjoyed it actually the last time when I was talking about Marx. So now we're going to talk. Actually, we're only going to talk briefly about Heidegger. Look, this is being in time because I have too many books. But in really just a very specific part from Heidegger, which struck me as very, it got me spinning and thinking a lot about introverted sensation, because I tend to agree with IDR Lab's typing of Heidegger as an ISTJ, as a dominant SI type, and I'm going to get into a little bit of why I think that's correct. But I'm also going to get into the main thing. Well, I'll just start and you'll see where I'm going. So the passage I was trying to reread or go back through Being in Time. And there's a passage in really the very beginning, not in the introduction, but in where the actual book proper, Part 1, Division 1, Preparatory Fundamental Analysis of Dasein. By the way, I think that, I mean, people have said this before, but people have suggested that you should translate Dasein as being there, and I disagree, all of you people, because I have qualifications or whatever. If you're going to translate it, it's just a little pet peeve of mine. If you're going to translate it, I think that it's best to retain the order of the words as much as is possible in terms of the grammar, because I think that even though different languages, there might be different tendencies the human mind still, when it hears one word before another word, um, or just the structure, I think in most cases still carries a certain amount of meaning that will be lost if you translate it by switching up the word order. It just doesn't, it won't sound right. And so if you're going to translate Dasein, so da means there or here, it's like a, or it could mean in. It's a spatial, what's the word? Um, I think it's I think it's preposition anyway. It doesn't matter. It means like there. Sign means being. It's like a like to be. It's like a form of to be essentially. So Dasein rather than being there, which is fine, but I think it works better if you say their being. So their hyphen being, because for me it makes it much more clear that Dasein is a noun that, in a sense, is representing a form. It's representing, what's the term? There's a term for it where you take a verb and you turn it into a noun, like walking. You say, so and so is walking. So you've turned walking into a noun that you can then equate another subject with. So if you say, I am Dasein, you say, I am their being, in the same way that you might say, I am walking, I am their being. So I am being there. I am existing in such a way that I can be described as being there as opposed to being over here or being in this other place. I think another way you could, it mixes it up with another word that he says, which literally is in being or being in. But when I originally looked at it, I started translating it in my head as in being, just because I think that better communicates this notion of indwelling, of you dwelling in a place, because that's kind of what Heidegger is talking about, is this notion of you exist in a context, in a place, and you have all these things around you that take on certain meaning depending on the kind of way in which you are existing and the way you are living. So their being, it's a very Kierkegaardian kind of concept where you are deciding to be there as opposed to here, to live in this way as opposed to that way, either or, right? So this kind of gives you a bit of introduction just in case I guess it will be helpful if you have some familiarity with Heidegger on some level, but he is a very, I do agree that he's an ISTJ, and you see that in his liking for Kierkegaard, who is INFP, same kind of functions. He has a fascination with, well, let's get into it, because later on, so what he's doing is he's talking about their being as the fundamental. I'm gonna butcher Heidegger because he puts things in such a precise way. So it's like trying to turn a house of cards into an actual house. It's like it's really hard for me to actually live in this place because you've made everything so pristine. I'm sure that's how people think about TI. I think that's how TE users feel about TI. It's like I can't do anything with this without it falsifying what you meant to imply. I need to be able to figure out how to apply these concepts, but it's like it's this pristine little tower. That's how I tend to feel about his more SI-ish way of phrasing things. But anyway, he's very careful in his language, and it's like I don't know how to. But going back to, all you need to know is that Dasein, or their being, as I like to translate it, Dasein is a fundamentally human trait, for lack of better words. And basically, in my mind, what it comes down to is he's pointing out the fact that the fundamental trait for Heidegger of human beings is the fact that they can choose how they are going to exist and be in the world. They can, so for instance, in this quote, in determining itself as an entity, Dasein always does so in the light of a possibility which it is itself. So Dasein knows that it is a thing, that it has a sense of identity. or self-consciousness, you could say, and which in its very being it somehow understands. So it's a self-conscious thing, basically. And he goes on to say, at the outset of our analysis, it is particularly important that Dasein, their being, the I think of it better as like the act of being there, rather than thinking of like a person. I think of a person doing something. It is a mode. It is a way of being. And it is precisely that mode of being where you choose how you're going to be. So really, you could almost, I'd be radical enough to say you could just translate Dasein as choice or something. This cannot mean, however, that choice or choosing is to be construed in terms of some concrete possible idea of existence. At the outset of our analysis, it is particularly important that Dasein, choosing, should not be interpreted with the differentiated character of some definite way of existing. Right, you see what he's doing there, right? He goes so roundabout in this. And I swear I'm going to get to the typology in a minute, but it's just important. What he's saying here is that we're not talking about any particular choice of life that has been made. We're just talking about the act of choosing itself. And in a minute we're going to see my use of the word choosing is oversimplified. It is better to say their being, because he's not just talking about the act of choosing. He's talking about sort of the longer term, the string of choices, you can almost say, that result in a mode of being in the world. I live in a house. Jordan Peterson likes Heidegger because you get that notion of cleaning your room. You can interpret that very well into Heidegger, because Heidegger notes that we exist in a space, and you clean up your room to change your being there, your mode, and improve it in a sense, because you can do that as a self-conscious being. So, but here he's saying, I'm not talking about any particular mode of being. I'm just talking about the act of being and of choosing to be in itself. But that it should be uncovered in the undifferentiated character which it has proximally and for the most part. This undifferentiated character of Dasein's everydayness is not nothing, but a positive phenomenal characteristic of this entity. So what he's saying is, and this is where we start to get into typology, because I think this is a very SI method of approaching the subject. And it's brought out a great deal when you compare Heidegger with his, the word escaped me, his admirer, Jean-Paul Sartre. What Heidegger is implying is this undifferentiated character of Dasein. So Dasein, in a sense, in itself, is not nothing. It's not, you're not in a vacuum. When you take away all of the particular parts or aspects of choosing, or aspects of what it means to actually be there, Heidegger is saying something very interesting, that in his view, you're not left with just nothing. It's not a vacuum. Instead, out of this kind of being, he says it's not nothing, but a positive phenomenal characteristic of this entity. So what you get actually looks like something. That's very important. Out of this kind of being and back into it again, so this is like the ground. Well, I'll get to it in a minute. Out of this kind of being and back into it again is all existing such as it is. We call this everyday, undifferentiated character of Dasein averageness. And because this average everydayness makes up what is ontically proximal for this entity, it has again and again been passed over in explicating Dasein. Okay, this is what really struck me and got me thinking about typology. As far as I can tell, what Heidegger is implying here is that, when you take away Um, so, well, I'm trying to figure out the best way to approach this. He is saying that there is, in fact, um, an underlying, uh, like an underlying human condition that is shared for all intents and purposes by everybody. That when you take away that there's certain things that humans do, that all humans end up doing, and that you can once you strip away, everything else is window dressing for this frame. I actually wrote a note here that might well, that's me ranting about how I disagree on the margins. People are going to have a fun time reading through my books when I'm dead because I'll have written so much in the margins. Um, but he's what he's saying is that what you get at the bottom is averageness. Um, so the mode that all human beings, when they are not actively, I'm starting to lose the thread. Out of this kind of being and back into it again is all existing such as it is. We call this everyday undifferentiated character of Dasein averageness. So yeah, what he's saying is that everybody, you can point to a mode of experiencing the world that is, for all intents and purposes, it's the same for everybody. It's the ground. That's why he says, out of this kind of being and back into it again is all existing such as it is. Everything goes back to this notion of averageness, the average human experience. And that is precisely what struck me because I don't like that. And so, for instance, I've seen this with INFPs. There's this notion of, and the notion is correct. There's nothing wrong with the notion. That's usually how I know it's a typology problem, is when I can't find any problem with the reasoning or with the implications, and yet it's still just, it grates on me because it's going against my typical attitude, my typology attitude. So, and let me give an example. For instance, I was in a humanities class. I can't remember what it was specifically, but we were talking about the Iliad, as you do in the humanities. And the teacher, I believe, was an INFP or possibly an ISTJ, but probably an INFP. Um, and he kept talking about the human condition. And that is a term that I had heard before and had usually kind of just filtered out because it was just kind of like, okay, it's like something that abstract artists would talk about, or not even the abstract artists really, but the people who liked to talk about abstract art would talk about the human condition, um, you know. And I was like, I had no idea what they were talking about. I just couldn't process it. And so he kept on talking about the human condition and his notion that Achilles keeps on trying to escape the human condition of death and, not death, but like of hunger and thirst and things. Anyway, the point was that at the time I had no idea what he meant by human condition. I'm like, what do you... I finally asked him and he was kind of like, oh, well, I'm talking about, he actually tried to explain it through like demonstration, like what are some conditions that all human beings have to face? And it's kind of like, well, I guess we all get hungry and have to eat food. And he's like, sure, we all need to drink water. But we also have things like we experience love and we experience hate and we experience fear of death. And the more specific he got, the more and more extremely uncomfortable I got. And this is a perfect example of one of the problems that you'll sometimes get, I think, between INFPs and INFJs. That's very difficult to articulate, but I think I've got it, or at least I'm close to it. The INFP and the ISTJ, in Heidegger's case, all of in fact, their whole little temperament. SI and FI within that temperament work together to produce this notion of the human condition, which what it amounts to in my mind is orienting yourself towards other people by assuming that their experience is the same as yours. So it's very FI, right? But combined with SI, because you're adding in this element of how you experience reality around you, how you experience the concrete things around you. So SI, FI, when they're together especially, have this tendency that the only way they're able to really proceed anywhere is if they assume something like that. That there are experiences that are shared and that are the same between people. It's a very rational way to proceed, but I did not like it primarily because I did not like the notion of this other person saying that, assuming that their experience of love is the same as mine. Now, this might strike some of you as kind of weird, and I'm trying to explain it, but when it happens, and it's interesting to me too to be able to kind of draw this out of myself. With SENI, or at least with the INFJ, particularly, there is so. Trying to figure out how best to go about this. So like with the teacher, what bothered me was this notion that he was implying, for instance, that so this is what bothers me. Sorry, I keep on stopping and starting. What bothers me and what has always bothered me is when people speak as though they knew, as though I were like them, and not giving me individuality or the opportunity for individuality. They don't mean to do that. That's just what happens. So when other people talk about, everybody like country songs, okay? Like rock country songs, like modern country songs, not old country songs, but more modern country songs started to really grind on me because it felt like this random cowboy person who gets drunk and gets laid and goes out and does all kinds of things was acting as though and talking as though these were all things that I had experienced, like, or that I wanted, and if I didn't, I was just I was in denial. I don't know if that makes sense, but like detestable, from my point of view, detestable kinds of feelings or detestable, idiotic even modes of existence being assumed to be a part of me or to be how I actually go about it. So another good example is when usually it's an ESTJ or an ISTJ who will, in their sense of humor, and good-naturedly will poke fun at the follies of youth, right? And will assume or will speak as though this is something that everybody has, where everybody talks back to their parents, everybody gets angry with them, or everybody, wants to go do things they're not supposed to do. And I'm like, I didn't have any of those things, which is true, by the way. I was kind of a little weirdo kid, apparently, because I don't fit any of the things that you're saying and are assuming I have been through as a way to try to understand me. It's like, no, you can't understand me that way. You're not going to understand me by assuming I'm like you, because I'm not. And if I found I started to be like you, I would change because I want to be me. That might sound like FI, but I'm going to differentiate in a bit because it's not quite that simple. But hopefully that makes sense, that kind of notion, because I think what's going on here, and it's very interesting, is so NESI, that axis, it's a form of perceiving that in the past I've started referring to as fair-minded. So FETI and NESI are both fair-minded modes of perception and judgment, whereas SENI and TEFI are goal-oriented modes of perception. What it comes down to, and pardon me as I kind of just make sure that I'm processing this. So, like with the difference of NESI and SENI, NESI, which is what Heidegger has, and what the INFP has, it is where you experience things, but you want to experience them in a fair-minded manner. So basically, what, as far as I can understand, what this comes down to, SENI simply experiences stuff, right? So like my issue with what Heidegger was saying is that it's like, I keep going all over the place. Let me just finish my thought. The problem with what Heidegger seemed to be implying, that there is like an experience of things that is common to everybody, that you can get down to that ground of everydayness or averageness, is it's like, I don't want to be average. I want to be exceptional. I want to be exceptional in the way that I perceive the world. I want to see the truth, because for me, that's what it means to see the truth. What is average is almost by definition not the truth, because you didn't work for it. So it's that kind of a mentality. It only applies to my way of wanting to experience things, though, and to perceive things. For Heidegger and for INFPs, they don't see it that way at all. For them, they're like, I don't want to see things just from my point of view. For lack of better words, NESI is, whereas SENI says, this is what I'm seeing, or better yet, this is what is there, because I'm seeing it. There's no conflict. There's no internal conflict, ideally. NESI, there's a ton of internal conflict, because they're essentially saying, what is it? I'm seeing this, but what is it that's really going on? In a certain sense, you could say it's, what should I be seeing? That's my INFJ way of trying to understand it. NESI, it's almost like, from my perspective, a moralistic kind of perception. Don't take that too far, but it because it has this should there, where you actually will edit what you think what you're seeing and experiencing in order to accord with what you consider to be a more objective picture of reality. So what you have with Heidegger is, he's like, okay, what I want is to be able to perceive the world in terms of what it really is. I don't want exceptional or outside the box ways of viewing it. I just want the true way of seeing it, the proper way of seeing it, the average way of seeing it, in a sense. Whereas for me and for Jean-Paul Sartre, so let me get to Sartre in a moment, I think one of the big differences between Sartre and Heidegger is that Sartre doesn't think of the averageness or everydayness at all in the same way. For Sartre, he posits the existential subject, the choosing man, as in a vacuum for all intents and purposes. When you strip away the conditions for that person's existence, if you're really stripping them away, then nothing will remain, because there is no ground that as far as Jean-Paul Sartre is concerned, there is no ground that connects all the human beings besides the fact that they can choose what kind of being they want to be or how they want to exist. It's not quite as simple as that. So maybe a better way to put it is that there is no shared experience. There is facticity. You're in a certain kind of body and you have to figure out how you're going to deal with that. But that's different than the assumption that there is an actual everydayness to everybody's experience, that everybody has the same kind of everydayness in their experience that they return to. I don't find that in Sartre. I certainly don't find it in myself, that kind of an assumption. Because I don't want to, I don't assume that I have that kind of a connection with other people. I don't rely on that. I don't want to rely on that. I don't know how another person is actually experiencing the world. The way that I find out is I have to watch them, and I watch them carefully, um, and I watch what they do, and then I think about it, and there is some internal processing, but it's NI processing. It's NITI processing, which is very different from SIFI, where I'm trying to synthesize, and I am comparing somewhat with my own modes of experiencing things, but where, I try to like model in my own head what it is that they might be, or what it is that might be the cause of them doing such and such, and try to see if I can figure it out. But it's all based on this much more just trying to observe them and listen to what they say, because there's no assumption that there's this underlying connection on an experiential level. Some of this I might classic problem, as I'm speaking, I realize, oh, some of the things I've said I've put too radically, because I've realized that, well, I have TI, and TI does see there being connections, and I'm like, God dang it. Now I got to go back and try to edit it. But I'm not going to do that for now, because I think you get the point. What I am going to do now is let's review really quick. So NESI, in my view here, it's a kind of perception that wants to know what is the way I should be seeing things. And so you have almost this normative mode of perception that it's trying to get to. That's why, so with NE, you have all this discussion. It's like I want to see all the different points of view, because I'm trying to find the one that's the most reasonable. Or rather the conglomerate that's the most reasonable. I think that's what I was trying to express in my last video, where I was talking about how it's more social, which I do think it is, but it's like I want to say that it's like conformist, because that's how it feels to me, even though I know that's not correct, because there's all these NE types who are like completely off the wall and pride themselves on being very nonconformist, and it's like, okay, yeah, that doesn't quite work. But if I think of it more in terms of what I keep on wanting to describe as this sociability or sense of conformity is not conformity, but from my perspective, it's this shoot, I lost it. The sense that there's the sense that the kind of perception they're trying to get at is ultimately a normative perception. Whether or not other people actually have it, in most cases, I think actually, and that's why they're more nonconformist, is that they'll usually think that most people